The spectre of Thomas Robert Malthus haunts ecology. For anyone who doesn't know, Malthus is a political philosopher and economist who was instrumental in the sort of early development of classical capitalist political economy. He is most well known for supposedly arguing for the reduction of population or population control to make sure that high living standards could occur under a different type of economy, under a new growing economy. In his view, supposedly, as population expands, so too does food production fail to keep up. So for lots of people, Malthus has become synonymous with limits, synonymous with population control. And in ecology, lots of supposed neo-Malthusians basically take this supposed idea of Malthus and apply it to global limits, apply it to global warming, saying that we need to control populations, particularly in the global south, in order to limit global warming. This is the spectre of Malthus that haunts ecology. But in Kallis's book, Limits, Why Malthus Was Wrong and Why Environmentalists Should Care, the character of this haunting is challenged. As it's become more popular, degrowth as a political idea has been accused by many of being this sort of neo-Malthusian population control thing. This is an attack line pushed by people like Lee Phillips and Matt Huber, who frequently basically write the same article about degrowth being Malthusian in the Jacobin every couple of months. But it's also a line that our old friend Peter Coffin, remember them? They used to attack degrowth as neo-Malthusian population control as well. And Coffin cites this book from Kallis as evidence of degrowth's secret Malthusian plot. No evidence is given to support this claim, but they do this in their fake self-published book that we talked about in another video, which was unfortunately blighted by terrible audio issues. But reading Kallis, we could come to the conclusion that views from people such as Coffin and Lee Phillips bear a much closer connection to Malthus's actual theories than any left degrowthers they spend denouncing, which personally I think is very funny. So, today we're doing our second in our new sort of book review series, talking about this book from Kallis about degrowth and limits, and why Malthus was wrong in the specific way that he was. So, I hope you all enjoy this one. The last book review didn't do too well, but it inspired a video which did okay, so we're carrying on with this. So Kallis's re-examination of Malthus and neo-Malthusians is a really accessible and interesting re-examination of Malthus's role in justifying emergent capitalist society. You know, rather than the view of Malthus presented by the likes of The Economist or Caleb Maupin, to pick another ghoul to to scare the children, and Peter Coffin and the Jacobin motley crew as well. Contrary to view espoused by this motley crew that Malthus prophesied societal collapse as population spirals out of control, exhausting natural resources and justifying population control, Kallis shows how Malthus actually viewed population as reaching a kind of equilibrium related to advances in the production of food. Population comes up, food can't keep up, food production comes up, population comes up, food can't keep up, and so on. That's the basic argument. But this equilibrium is only really possible when there exists a high degree of inequality, a class who owns and a class who work. Unsurprising for someone who is essentially an early prophet of capitalism. Malthus's argument, according to Kallis, is not that the poor need to be stopped from procreating. He was, in fact, anti-birth control. But he believed that poor laws should be repealed so that workers don't become lazy, entitled, and lack the good Protestant work ethic which is required to produce the economic activity which supports population growth. Again, that is to say, Malthus is a fundamental touchstone of capitalist, developmentalist economic theory. To improve the world, the labouring classes have to be forced into becoming ideal worker subjects, so that, to use Marxian terms, productive forces can be unleashed and development can occur and this population equilibrium can happen. But an interesting implication of this view of Malthus's theories is that they don't in fact support a hard limit to growth and development, as people like Coffin and Maupin and all that argue. Rather, Malthusianism is a school which necessarily supports the economic growth which emergent capitalism produces. This is only possible with the limitations imposed on the working classes. So this perspective should be familiar with a lot of people because it's consistent with much modern economic theory, and in particular with the neoliberal austerity politics which has defined much of the last 15 years and, according to Keir Starmer, will be defining much of the next 10 at least, if he gets his way.
Tax rises and spending cuts that did not appear in his manifesto.
There is a budget coming in October, and it's going to be painful.
Oh, ideology, the most boring social murderer that's ever existed. Punitive welfare regimes which punish and murder disabled people in the name of disciplining the working classes into the perfect economic subjects are a staple of the neoliberal world. Welfare must be restricted or people will become lazy and entitled and refuse to grow the economy. If you want some of the details of the horror that this produces, you can look at another one of my videos on when I used to work in welfare rights, because it was grim. It was a real grim time, and it's not gotten better. But this interaction between unlimited economic growth and the capitalist imposed limitations of the oppressed classes of the world forms the central critique in Kallis's work. So rather than a limited world which can only support populations with a productive capitalist inequality, Kallis argues that limits are essentially socially constructed to serve particular purposes. Which is not to say that global warming is not a firm fact, but rather to point out that global warming is only a limit to the world when viewed in a particular way. Eco-fascists who seek to maintain high standards of living by gating off their homes to those displaced and dispossessed by global warming don't view global warming as a firm limit to their lives. They live in their utopia of unlimited consumption. This is a particularly useful insight. A left which doesn't consider that the effects of global warming may be curtailed or limited for an eco-fascist regime while those left outside the walls are left to burn, might find itself blindsided. Fascism, as we've seen the past few days, especially anti-immigrant fascism, is on the march.
Tonight, violence and vitriol on the streets of the United Kingdom, targeting migrants and mosques in an ugly eruption of anti-immigrant sentiment. For more than a week, riots breaking out in city after city, cars torched in northeast England, fires raging in Belfast in Northern Ireland. This hotel, used to house asylum seekers, set ablaze.
Contrastingly, Kallis argues that limits should be self-imposed. He doesn't mean this in a sort of individualistic, consumerist sense where we all have to recycle and, use less, switch the lights off and all that stuff, which is obviously inherently individualistic and inherently extremely limited in what it can actually change. But rather, that power in general has to be limited. Bourgeois class power must be limited, although abolished might be a better word, as democratic power is dispersed throughout society, as capitalist production is overturned, and as we decide collectively to limit the production and the use of certain things. This might be drastically limiting the use of fossil fuels or completely eliminating the use of fossil fuels. Limiting the massive amount of food waste that's produced, or limiting the power that any individual or any class may have over others. In opposition to those environmentalists who accept Malthusian hard limits to life, Kallis argues in a pleasingly contradictory turn that abundance is possible through the self-imposition of limits. This, he argues, is directly counter to strains of environmentalists who argue for population control, and counter to both those capitalist developmentalists and, frankly, eco-modernist, eco-socialists who argue that we can innovate, use technological development and use economic development to somehow skirt round and develop our way out of global warming, counter to much of the existing evidence. This is also counter to those sort of eco-fascists and other ecologists who still draw on the Limits to Growth report from the 1960s. the Limits to Growth report was a report in the 60s which essentially made the argument that there were firm limits on what we could achieve with a current form of capitalism because of like natural limits in Earth's what natural resources we can take from Earth and what populations can be sustained by it. Eco-fascists often draw on this report, and Kallis is essentially be like, don't draw on this report. And it's through his critiques of those who believe in green growth through, among other things, capitalist investment in technology, that we can see how eco-modernists like Matt Huber and Lee Phillips, always writing, again, the same article in the Jacobin, and you know, Coffin and Maupin and all those people, may be closer to Malthus than those they denounce. Malthus's arguments rest on a technological and productive improvements to overcome supposed natural limitations. This is similar to the arguments from these people, and indeed people like fully automated luxury communist Aaron Bastani, that what is needed to overcome global warming is not a limit to constant economic expansion, but an investment in technology and expansion of productive forces. And which is, you know, in contrary to basically most of the evidence that we have at the moment, which is showing that any decoupling due to technology, due to productive forces of improvement, is far from close enough to even begin to reach goals like limiting climate warming to 1.5 degrees. I think you'd have to go back to my old video on degrowth, I think, to check this fact, but it is about current decoupling at the rate that we're at would take 240 years to reach current climate global Paris Accord goals. So that's not good. So, you know, these arguments about green growth and developmentalism really run up against firm empirical boundaries, or limits, you might say. So for those people who argue that what's needed to overcome global warming is just technological expansion and green growth, which is in short development, Malthus would agree. That is the Malthusian position. The development is what's needed to overcome these firm limits. But to add some critique to this book, despite being eminently readable, there are limits to the work. Firstly, there's a chapter dedicated to examining the ethic of limits within ancient Greece. And Kallis' argument is not that we should idealise or seek to reproduce ancient Greece, but to illustrate how societies based explicitly on limitation can function. Accepting this argument, the chapter remains a bit of a distraction. I'm not sure that the example of ancient Greece is a particularly convincing one for placing limitations on power for the purposes of egalitarianism. Ancient Greece was a slave society. Was defined by inequality, but even if Kallis' argument is more subtle than simply drawing inspiration from Athens, it still left me feeling a bit distracted. I read it and I was like, alright, this seems not very useful to me, and doesn't even seem particularly convincing as a piece of argument either. The second tension, though, is one which runs through a lot of degrowth literature, and that is between the radical anti-capitalist politics and a more technocratic reformism. And don't misunderstand me, Kallis doesn't necessarily advocate for liberal reformism, but he doesn't advocate for communist revolution either, which, for my money, is likely the only way to adequately achieve the limited life of abundance for which he advocates. And this uneasiness to go whole hog for communism. How do the bourgeois think they can stop 30 to 50 wild revolutionary hogs? They can't. But the uneasiness to go for whole hog communism is likely because he wants to communicate a politics of limits to a liberal audience, or at least a non-communist one. But at this point, I think the limits of appealing to liberal audiences with hedged liberal language have become quite apparent. You know, I've become more and more sceptical of the notion that we can essentially mislead people into becoming more radical than they are. I think we have a duty to just be honest in what we believe, and maybe more critically, be honest with the necessary implications of our arguments. If our argument is that technocratic reformism is never going to solve global climate catastrophe, then we have to be brave enough to build, push, and advocate for revolution. We're not going to trick people into communism by tempering the revolutionary implications of our arguments. We're just going to trick ourselves into falling back into liberal non-answers. So if there's anything to gain from this critique, it's the idea that degrowth as a movement or as a method of criticism or anything like that must shed any pretense at liberalism, at reformism, and really come out strong as a movement of radical whole hog communism, but with a degrowth character. And that is that's my short review of Kallis's book, Limits, Why Malthus Was Wrong and Why Environmentalists Should Care. Again, if you're able to sit through the terrible sound of the last video, the video on that, which is linked in the description. Also linked is the transcript for the video, so that anyone who can't bear listening to it can still read the critique. As ever, thank you for watching. I will do my Patreon readouts in just a second. And let me know, as ever, if you like these book reviews and if you like my work. Like, subscribe and share. It'd be really, really helpful to me. And, if you can, sign up to Patreon or give off a one-off donation via PayPal or Ko-fi. Here come the Patreon readouts. Cheers. Alright, once again, thank you very much. And coming now are the $10 and up patrons who get their names read out in the credits. Patrons also get early access to videos and book reviews and a little bit extra writing that I'll do here and there, and behind the scenes stuff as well, with screenshots put up early and things like that. And also access to a Discord server. I always forget about the Discord server. $5 and up patrons get access to a Discord server. I will read out the names now. We have Demo Squid, Dying of Thirst, Sovel Hayes, Earl Grey Tea, Bonnie, Katie Marshall, Nina G Public Relations, FD Signifier, Quint Wolf, Kim Crawley, Anita Anespi, Ellis Wren, S, Hey Joe, Cameron Blakemore, Misling, Lawrence Rowland, Daniel Swing, Cyril Smith, Sammy, Rachel Ann, I don't know why I'm so bad at this. I could redo it, but again, I could not redo it. Rachel Ann, Melanie Estes, Layum, Xander Corvus, Fiel Westfall, Jack, TP Skyen, Christopher Poff, Morgussie, Daniel Cusid, Joshua Moldenhauer, Tom Price, Cade Soiree, Esoteric Fictionalism, Austin Talman, Robin, Rachel Miskin, Duncan Skinner, Neil Zawildgard, Tinfoil Pancakes, Kieran Gore, Aga Ghost, Barney Carroll, Joel, Daniel Hughes, Nelly Zacheva, J. Fraser Cartwright, Aaron, Tamash Kispeter, Paul Singleton, and that's it. That was ropey today, and yet I think there's a charm about that. Again, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time for hopefully a longer video than this. Bye, love you.